found out about the conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh in Artsakh from an American Armenian woman who told me about it, and I interviewed her for my my podcast. Her name was Anna Tufenkian or something like that. Tufenkian, yeah. And so I didn't know anything about Armenia or about this region until then, but because I cover hot zones around the world, when I heard about the conflict, I thought it would be a good idea to come cover it. So I pitched it to some of my outlets in the United States, and so the outlets that I worked for said they liked the idea, and so I came over at the end of October and spent several weeks covering the conflict. Went into Stepanakert, and while it was being shelled, so when the hospital got blown up, I was right there and ran over and got the aftermath of that, and sent those reports back to the United States. I cover wars and disasters around the world, and have for almost 20 years. And so I've spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and places like that. So I'm accustomed to war, and this was an interesting conflict because it was number one, directed at civilians mostly in Stepanakert. And it was so one-sided because of the assistance of Turkey and Azerbaijan working together. And with the drones that Turkey had, it was really bad for the soldiers of Artsakh. I saw the aftermath of the cluster munitions that were dropped on Stepanakert. The many holes in the buildings and the windows and the cars, which obviously were directed at civilian targets. There's no question that they were being aimed at the civilian populace, not at military targets. When the hospital was hit, it was a direct hit on the hospital, and there were 4 missiles that came in all around the hospital. So it's obvious there were no military targets around the hospital. It's obvious that they were intending to destroy the hospital. So it was clear from my experience in covering these conflicts that the intent behind the shelling of Stepanakert was to terrorize the civilian populace. The reason that I know that is because they were not firing all of their missiles at once. They weren't trying to destroy the whole city. They were just one at a time sending missiles over in such a way that the sirens never finished going off. The sirens kept going off all night long, which meant it's very difficult for people to get any rest. They just have to live in constant fear. They couldn't go outside to get food or anything like that. It was just a war of attrition meant to scare the civilians out of Artsakh and make them leave the city. Every war has collateral damage. Every war has unintended damage, right? But it was clear in this conflict in Stepanakert that the weapons were being fired intentionally at a civilian city, but B, it was the very definition of terrorism. It was the very definition of a war crime, because they were intentionally doing what they could to frighten the population and make them leave so that it would be easy for them to come in and take it over. The other tactical or strategic thing that you could see about these attacks is that they were randomly aimed. So either the Azeris were very, very poorly trained on their weapons, or they were intentionally shooting at random around different points of the city in order to scare people out of the entire city. So when these bombs would go off, we would rush out with my driver to try to find where they had landed. And in many cases, it was an old tatik in her house, and there was a big smoking crater where her house used to be. So we would interview her if she was, alive and well, and ask her, what had happened, and hear her story. And it was in that way, I really fell in love with the people of Armenia, because when you see the strength of these old women who just had their house blown up, and they're saying, "Thank God, I'm so thankful for the blessings He gives me, and I pray for our enemies." It just made me realize that Armenians are an incredibly special people. So I realized there's a much bigger story here. It's much more than just a regional conflict. This is a small country, a friendly country, a nice country, a safe country that's in a very bad neighborhood, that's surrounded by opponents or enemies that would like to see it destroyed. And that was a bigger story. And I realized that in 2 weeks' time, I can't do a good enough job to tell this story the way it needs to be told. So because I made that realization, I decided to try, with the encouragement of some American Armenians who I talked to after I returned back to the States. I said, man, I'd really like to tell this story right. I'd like to do a good job of telling the story of Armenia. And I was encouraged to do that. And I said, well, we just have to raise enough money to make this documentary, and we could make a full-length hour documentary out of this. And so we decided to do that, and we were able to, little by little, raise some money. And so we came back in January of this year, and I brought my family with me because I wanted them to see. They don't get to go to war zones like I do, especially my children. So I wanted to bring them and let them experience Armenia through the eyes of a young person. I'm very jaded. I've been to so much war that I see destruction and I say, that's about what it's like. But my children don't get to see that. So I thought it would be a more powerful story if I could have my children come and see the effects of war firsthand. So we'll start out with the experience and the footage that I got during the war and describe that. And then I want to go into bringing back my family the second time. And it was very emotional, much more emotional than it is for me. When we went to visit those old tatik that had their house turned into rubble, there were a lot of tears, and they were very powerfully impacted by what they saw. And so I think the viewer will be more emotionally attached to it because of that. Then we had an idea. When you see the news of war and destruction, it's depressing because you can't do anything about it. And when I brought my family back, they wanted to do something about it. They wanted to help these people somehow. And we can only do so much, but we decided to try to help some of the people who had lost their homes and lost family members in the war. And there's such a good feeling that comes from that. When we posted about it on social media, I had many, many people start to send me money and say, we want to help too. So because we came in the winter time and everything was covered with snow, we decided we wanted to come back in the spring and show the symbolic renewal of life coming back to Armenia after the war. And when we decided to come, we decided to open that trip to whoever wanted to come along. And a whole bunch of people who follow me on my podcast and on social media decided to come along with us. So now we have 16 people here on this trip, and they've come to not just see Armenia and experience the wonderful people and the wonderful culture and the wonderful history and the wonderful food, but actually bring help and hope and love to the people of Armenia from America. Yeah, and these are not Armenian people, but they're Christians by and large, and they realize that Armenians are our brothers, even if we're not Armenian, because we're connected through Christ. And we want to come and bring hope and bring help, and just bring the message to the people of Armenia that we love you and we stand with you, and we feel your pain because we're connected that way. So this will be our last trip, most likely, and we should have everything we need after this trip. So we'll go into post-production once we finish this trip. I would say probably 4 or 5 months, maybe in the fall, if we can get on it and get it edited together. I'm not sure about how it will be distributed, because that depends on how much. If we can raise enough money, then we can distribute it through traditional channels and try to even get it into theaters. If we don't get enough money, that's fine. We'll make the best message that we can, the best project that we can, and we'll release it on YouTube and try to put it out there. And the Armenian community is so tight-knit and so patriotic that they will distribute it for us.